Richard Prinzie is joining us today. He's a CPA who manages a private practice with offices in New York, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles, while also providing CEO services to several accounting and tax firms. His focus is on self-employed professionals in the entertainment and creative professions. That's why I asked him to join us today. And Richard's also an active member of the community. So he works pro bono for many not-for-profits and political campaign funds. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell me, first of all, for those of us who don't know exactly what AB5 is, what is AB5? And then how have you seen it affect the entertainment and creative industries?
Well, AB5 is a law passed in California that just recently passed. It's actually enacted January 1st of this year, that attempts to address the freelance. It was really designed for the gig economy, and Uber and Lyft was the driving force behind it. So there was a time when Uber and Lyft drivers were making way below minimum wage after they factored their expenses and so forth in. So California thought it would be good to go ahead and address that and turn them into W-2 employees, which not really going to work out well. It's probably never going to actually happen, but the law passed, the courts approved it, and we're in the position now where it was applied to everyone that's freelance. So effectively in California, unless you can prove that you're absolutely and completely independent and it's a business-to-business relationship, you effectively have to be on a W-2. Just had huge impacts in the entertainment field. Although there are so many lawsuits going on relating to this and so much litigation that from my experience, the clients I deal with, several thousand of them, haven't necessarily implemented this law to its fullest extent yet. They've found some workarounds and they're stressing about it. And if you go on Facebook and join one of the freelancer union or freelancer sites, you'll see that the activity has blown up over this. Mm-hmm. New York is also implementing a similar law. They haven't passed it yet. We're trying to stop that one from getting passed.
Okay. Are you on in a group to help maybe roll this back? And is there a way to roll it back? Because it seems to have right now it seems to have a negative impact on a lot of people.
It does, and the problem with it is that it's not really sustainable. There are several, I guess, unintended consequences of this law, and I'll just give you a few examples because this, a lot of companies that hire, especially in the production world, they hire freelancers because they hire a camera guy for 3 days. They're not going to put that person on payroll, right? The cost of implementing the payroll is prohibitive, and they're really not employees. So what happens is if you end up turning the 100 1099 people, freelance people, into W-2s a year, you're also firing 100 people a year, right? So your unemployment rates are going to go through the roof. So your workman's comp rates and everything else. So you're going to have all these employees per se, and if you can see me, I'm doing air quotes when I say employees because they're not employees. And there's just really no way to actually implement this law effectively in several of the industries.
Does it help to have an LLC or to be an SCorp? Does that help us?
Yeah, one of the biggest exemptions to the law is business-to-business transactions. So, and I open up about 20 corporations a month, many of them in California. Used to take me about a week and a half to get a reply from them. It takes 6 weeks now. I think that's a direct relationship with this AB5 law.
So everyone's filing to become an LLC.
Really, that's the only way you can do it now. Is if you're in California, you almost certainly have to open up an LLC or an SCorp. But there's still rules you have to follow. And be aware of when you're doing a business-to-business transaction. but it certainly is the best defense to this, right? So paying ABC Corp is better than paying, paying your individual name.
Yeah. Why do you think that some employers are afraid to do a loan out? Because just to give you an example, my husband just started on a new show, and they actually told him that they wouldn't pay him through our corporation, and because of AB5.
Well, the problem with it is the penalties for not following that rule is a $10,000 fine for the company per person. And for the first time ever, there's actually a $10,000 fine per person imposed on the accountant that gave them the advice. Now, this is one of those things that they put in there to just give the law some teeth. It'll never actually happen. They'll never be able to get that through a court. So the problem is that whenever there's a new law passed, California, passes the law, and then the franchise tax board interprets the law, and then the court cases eventually determine what the final verdict is for the law. And this is so new, we don't have the court cases yet. So there's a lot of anxiety out there in my profession as well as yours, because we are kind of on the hook for this too. And so I think you're getting a lot of conservative accountants giving advice on that's more in their better interest than the clients. But I've been telling people to do what makes sense. If they're hiring somebody for a short-term gig for a very particular project, and it's not an expertise that they have in-house, then let's hire them as a freelancer. And the people that are going to eventually determine the outcome of this are very large production houses, because sooner or later they're going to catch up to somebody, find them, they're going to go to court and fight it. That's when we're going to determine what it is. But California, to their credit, has been negotiating with us. I mean, I've been involved in a couple of groups that have been trying to fight this. And because again, one of the other unintended consequences is, for example, like writers. So they said, well, if you submit more than 35 articles a year, you have to be an employee. So California's intention there was to make people employees. But what actually happened is they just hired more freelance writers, and they limited to 35. So now they're actually hurting these people because they're not getting the W-2 jobs. So they've been pretty good about at least negotiating with us. And again, a lot of this is going through the court system. I've done some testimony in those cases, but they're it's literally an industry by industry, almost a profession by profession argument to be made.
And then as if we are our own company and as a creative entrepreneur, what do we need to watch out for in terms of hires?
Well, technically, if you hire anybody, you're supposed to put them on W-2 for the most part, unless they can fall into one of the categories, and they have to really completely be independent. I think the two biggest ones that I'd like to highlight are if you work for multiple employers, right? So the obvious stuff is if you're going into the office every day, or you're going into the same studio every day, and that's the only job you have, you should be an employee. But if you have a company, that's a great help. Even if you don't have a company, though, if you have multiple people that you're working for, you set your own schedule, you're in charge of your own work product, and you don't perform as an employee would perform, then you can still stay on the freelance side. But there's always a risk that they can call you out on it. Again, I think it's extremely unlikely that anyone in a small production house or individual is going to get called out. They're looking for the big guys. I mean, their prime focus here is Uber and Lyft.
So these production companies that are saying, like, they're kind of using AB5 as an excuse, it's just out of fear.
Yeah, well, yeah, their accountants and lawyers are telling them you have to comply. It's the law. right? So they're complying. It's costing them money too. They don't want to do this. Like these production houses have them on freelance for a reason. But if you go back, I've been doing this for 25 years. I started my practice in MTV's conference room when MTV had 10 people in it working for them. So if you go back into that cycle, everybody was freelance back then. The whole industry was freelance. So now when the IRS caught up to these people, they decided, hey, you've got $200,000 of income here, for 2 years, and you haven't filed your taxes. You owe, $150,000 in tax and penalties and interest, and they weren't working at the time. So the industry was so bad at complying with the tax laws that they kind of came up with this new thing where the IRS said, listen, we'll turn our backs to you, we'll close our eyes to you if you just put these people on W-2. So at least there's withholding. So they created a term called permalance. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yes.
Permalance was kind of the thing for a few years until it became obvious that permalance was completely inappropriate. You have people on W-2 sitting right next to a staff person. Staff person gets all the benefits. Permalance person doesn't. It's completely inappropriate. And there were rallies in Times Square to protest this behavior. So they went back into the freelance side. And fortunately at the time, that's when the incorporating or LLCs became cost effective for smaller people to have, smaller companies to have. So that became the trend. Now it looks like they're trying to push everybody back into the permalance world. So you stick around long enough, you see these cycles, they kind of, they go around. But I don't think this one's going to really take effect.
You think that there's a possibility that it's going to get stopped at some point?
I don't think it's going to be repealed. I think it's just going to be managed and manipulated to the point where it really is not that effective. But we all have to suffer through the consequences of it while it's still a law. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are getting hurt by this. You have to remember too, my freelancer who's making $60,000, $70,000 a year as a freelancer, and they're paying their own expenses, using their own equipment. They would show maybe $20,000 of taxable income. They would get Obamacare subsidies for their health insurance and everything else. Now they make $70,000 on a W-2. They can't write anything off as expenses, and they lose their subsidy for health insurance.
Right.
So you're just punishing everybody. The employers don't like it. The freelancers and employees don't like it. So there has to be some sort of give.
Right. And then those of us, are limited, right? If you're W-2, you're limited to how much you can also put away for retirement and that kind of stuff. So that's the main reason why I think a lot of freelancers in the entertainment industry wanted to create a company for themselves so that they can actually put away more money.
Right. I mean, the only option you really have as an individual with W-2s is an IRA.
Right.
But if you want to put more money away than that, it's tough to do as an individual.
Yeah.
But that's what I say. Those are the unintended consequences. Plus, back in 15 years ago, and I still get this today, I used to have clients coming in with 45 W-2s. And the IRS computer considers you an employee. So now, after 2018, when they changed the tax code, you can't write expenses off, the unreimbursed business expenses that most of these people lived on for many years. They're gone, right? So even though you have 45 W-2s, you've been on that many shows, the IRS does not consider you a freelancer, so you can't use the Schedule C, which is the freelance business form, to write your expenses off.
Right.
I've been advising clients very strongly not to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. Right. In the past, prior to the 18 change, a lot of freelancers would come in with W-2s and say, no, I'm a freelancer, actor or whatever, and here's all my expenses. And we would write the expenses off on the freelancer form, even though there was no income. After 2018 change, that became a very high risk. You can still do it, but it becomes a very high risk scenario because the IRS computer is going to recognize you as an employee with a zero income, all expenses on the Schedule C. They throw you into a high risk audit pool. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're going to get audited, just means your risk is going to go up considerably.
And speaking of that, I mean, there were lots of changes that happened with that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. What about this new act, the Secure Act? Like, what tax changes have you seen for people to, freelancers and, any creative industries for this year?
I haven't really seen any negative implications of that yet. The Job Act that changed in 2018,
Mhm.
it actually has been a positive thing for most people. It's been a little negative in the production world, especially for like the small actors, because most people in their career, they won't spend $30,000 for headshots and acting classes and lessons to make $20,000 in income. In that profession, they do that all the time. So they're the ones that get hurt the most. But I would say the overwhelming majority of the clients that at least I deal with have benefited from the 2018 Act.
Mm.
The AB5 is a much bigger problem for everybody.
All right. Well, I'm going to open it up for questions. Dewan, you have a question?
I think my question, and if you covered this in some way, please just say I covered this. But I'm an actor, and because of the thing we just talked about, the 2018 thing, we ended up doing SCorp, for my acting, and I also have a vibrant coaching business that all fall. We put under the SCorp and a DBA under the SCorp as well.
Right.
I guess my concern is I don't fully grasp how this is affecting the acting portion, the AB5, because what SAG is saying is don't worry about it. It's good. But I'm still I just don't understand how it's affecting actors that are making, let's say, over 100K.
Well, if you're making 100K in an SCorp, you're writing off all your expenses and paying tax on the net.
Right.
When you get into a gig in California that they turn around and say, we're going to put you on W-2, they won't pay your SCorp, right? So now you have a W-2 that you're paying 50% in tax on versus, probably a 20% tax rate in the SCorp. So you're not able to write your expenses off. So the SCorp is an excellent tool. It's like my bread and butter. But at the end of the day, if you can't utilize it for income, you can't really just write expenses only through an SCorp, right? So that's what you'll find is that if you get into enough California gigs and they enforce this on you, you'll end up with all W-2s, no income in the SCorp, but plenty of expenses.
Mm.
When you get an SCorp just to write expenses off, that's when you start crossing that tax planning, tax fraud line, right? So you gotta be careful with that. Doesn't mean you can't do it for a year here, a year there, if you just happen to get a big job. But for the most part, it's not something you want to do year after year.
Okay. So this AB5 doesn't really apply to me right now as an actor because I'm making, my show's paying me through my SCorp. And the only thing I'm getting with W-2s are pre 2008 stuff that came in for W-2s before my SCorp. I have my residuals, you know what I mean?
Residuals. Yeah, residuals very often will continue to come in on W-2s.
Yeah.
It's okay to have some W-2. You
Yeah.
just want the active work that you're doing right now because that's the bulk of your income most likely.
It is.
And, and you want that through the SCorp. That's a great setup.
Great. And so the AB5 is not, I shouldn't be freaking out about this.
No,
Okay.
nobody should freak out about AB5. It's not going to be that big of a deal.
Okay.
If you get a creative accountant, they'll find a workaround for everybody. And again, this law is going to change several times in the next year or so.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Nothing to worry about.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, Emily or Arlene, do you have any questions?
I do. I also have an S-Corp. And so, we've been told some people are like, they won't do the freelance stuff unless you're an S-Corp. And then my husband is a camera operator and a DP, and he's already had a couple of productions, same thing that you said, Katie, saying that they're really only going to do W-2s through payroll services. My question is, obviously having the S-Corp itself carries its own sort of time and responsibilities and costs. At what point do you think it's going to not be worth it to have an S-Corp in this kind of situation?
Well, my rule of thumb with the S-Corp is if you're going to gross about 50,000 or more,
Hmm.
then the S-Corp is going to pay for itself because there's costs involved in having it. So, I mean, that's kind of where I usually start. So if I talk to somebody new, I usually start with, okay, what do you anticipate your income to be next year? And if it's in that 40 to 50,000 range, that's usually when we start talking about corporations. So
Okay.
that and you'll save way more than you'll spend. The last thing you ever want to do is voluntarily go on W-2. You know, the cameramen I've been dealing with have been getting more and more W-2s. For whatever reason, they seem to be pushing them harder to work on W-2.
Especially the union guys, like the
Yeah.
union shows that he works on, they're almost like, we do not do loan outs. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure why, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's because it's very hard for a camera person to pass the Borello test, which is that ABC test. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
Mm.
that's what they call the test where you determine if someone's an employee. But a cameraman is physically on a schedule in a place, so like they're a little tougher on them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like writers, you're fine as long as you don't submit more than 35 articles. Same thing with photographers. Producers, a lot of my producers haven't gotten hit with this yet, but I'm sure it's going to be the story this year because you remember this law just was enacted in January.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, my husband is a producer and he just heard that from the company that he just worked with. I mean, he worked with a company in January that didn't do that. They actually paid him through our corporation, but through our S-Corp. But this last job that he's on right now, they actually said because of AB5, we have to W-2 you. We can't do a loan out.
Yeah, that's gonna be the story of 2020 in my world. Hopefully not so much in yours.
Yeah.
I've been dealing with this on a daily basis.
Elaine, do you have any questions?
I had a quick question, which may or may not apply, but when you did the interview with the lawyer, which was wonderful, he mentioned that you could become a sole proprietor and that was actually like in AB5 in the law, that if you were somehow a sole proprietor, you were okay. But then like in the next breath, he said he kind of didn't trust it. And it left me a little confused. I wonder if there's any clarification around that.
Well, the idea is you want to be a business, not an individual. So you can go get a DBA, it's called, right? Fictitious name.
Mm-hmm.
Create the name, get an EIN number. It's really just tied to your social security number. So it's just your personal tax return.
Mm-hmm.
It's an option I give people when they say, well, I think I'm only going to make 30,000 this year, but I don't want to use my name. So we say, okay, go do this fictitious name. The corporation is going to cost you too much. So but the problem is, and the reason why the lawyer was probably hesitant to commit on this is there's no law here yet. There's no court cases. We live and die by court cases. The name Borello is the court case that created AB5. So they named the test after them, right? So until someone challenges if a DBA or a fictitious name is a business under AB5, we'll never know how that'll play out in the courtroom, right? So, and in my opinion, it's probably unlikely that that'll ever get played out because, again, if you're making any kind of money as a freelancer, you should not be practicing under your social security number or even a DBA, right? The sole proprietor thing is only for a very small amounts of activity.
Okay, no, that's good to know. I just didn't quite grasp what was going on there. It seemed like a potential workaround, but it sounds like not really a safe bet.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in California, the better bet is to do an LLC.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you don't expect your income to be high enough to incorporate, you can do an LLC in California. It's relatively same cost, and then the LLCs don't have a tax code. So what they do is they elect how they want to be taxed. So you can tax as a sole proprietor with an LLC, which definitely would qualify under AB5 as a business, and then just put that on your personal tax return. So you're not creating any additional cost for yourself. Every year you'll have a cost to open the LLC, but then there'll be no annual cost.
Right.
except for the business license in California of $800 a year. But you'll have the ability to leave that on your personal return. And then the best part is, if you have a great year, and at the end of the year you realize, oh, I made $100,000 this year, I don't want that on my personal return. You can retroactively enact or change the election to become an S-corp. So it gives you a lot of flexibility.
Huh. That's great
yeah,
to know.
in California, I do a lot of LLCs for that reason, right? Up and coming people.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you so much. That's helpful. Very helpful.
And you said that when you were talking to Emily, you said that 50,000 is pretty much kind of the threshold where you say, okay, if you're making at least 50,000, that's worth creating the LLC.
Yeah, that's kind of my rule of thumb, because at that point you'll save more in tax than it should cost you to do your taxes, pay your state filing fees.
Yeah.
It depends on what state you're in. California is like one of the most expensive states to have a company, LLC or S-corp, which has a $800 fee every year just to do business there. Nevada's like that, but New York is $25. So different states have different dollar amounts, but usually it's, depending on the state, it's between 40 and 50 grand is where it makes sense to incorporate it. Otherwise, again, you can do the LLC, or you can leave it on the personal tax return and your social security number too.
Okay, so how can we help in terms of like not getting it passed in New York, and then if possible, having it not be as harmful to us here in California? Well,
there's a lot of good Facebook pages that relate to this, or groups. Freelancers of New York is one I participate in a lot. Get involved that way, and they're going to send you out. They're not going to recommend that you write like form letters to your assemblyman and so forth. They'll give you phone numbers and have you call. And the more people that enact and participate in that, the more weight we're going to get. Now in New York, we're trying to stop the law from being enacted at all. Yeah. We didn't have that choice in California because it was a California Supreme Court ruling that kind of created the law, so it was kind of preempted us. The interpretation of the law is where we got killed in this situation we're now, because they interpreted the law in such a strict way in every industry, but it really did not apply to that. It wasn't intended for that purpose. So that's why I say we'll clean up California. It might take a couple of years, but we'll get it cleaned up. New York, we're just trying to avoid this altogether.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. If they can help it, they should try to stop it. Because it definitely we've definitely seen effects of it here already.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to add, Richard?
No, just get involved. Everyone in the community starts making phone calls. It's not going to hurt.
Mm-hmm. Actually, Katie, I have one more question, and this is more of a general question. What would you like to see the law be that would sort of solve these problems with freelancers and creative people, but would still protect people from being from the Uber people from being exploited and making less than minimum wage? Is there like a compromise proposal on the table?
No, there's nothing that I'm aware of that's a compromise in California, at least. I just think that the whole entertainment industry and creative industry should be exempt. There should be no.
Right.
They shouldn't be part of this. It's not conducive to the way that you guys do business, right? So they've exempted plenty of professions. Accounting is lawyers, engineers, surgeons, doctors. Like, we're all exempt. So why not put entertainment in there, right? So I don't think it's a far-fetched thing. I think it's very possible that you'll see that exemption added. Because again, it just doesn't make any sense to do that to them. Now, the Uber and Lyft drivers, that's a whole other argument. That they do get exploited, but if you talk to them, they're fine with it. Like they like that side hustle. A lot of my actors do drive Ubers and Lyfts, to pay the rent in the beginning. So that they probably just need to unionize or some sort of renegotiate in some group way. I don't think the state of California is really going to help anything there. Like, there's just no way that they can put them all on W-2. So California's initial attempts are just horrible. So they really just need to negotiate better contracts.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for your time and for your expertise.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Anytime.
And thank you, everyone, for being here.
All right, have a good day, guys.
Thanks. Bye.